As you likely know, May is Maternal Mental Health Awareness Month. Over the last couple of years, I've discussed maternal mental health with a variety of guests, and several of those guests have mentioned Postpartum Support International, often called PSI, as the primary and best resource. I too often mention the organization to new moms that I know and work with. But recently, I started to realize that I don't think I even know about all the resources they provide. So I asked PSI if someone could come onto the podcast to share more about the organization and all that they do. And I was delighted to hear that Wendy Davis, the president and CEO, was happy to come on and tell us all more about this unbelievably amazing organization. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with Wendy, and I walked away feeling so grateful knowing that PSI can literally support every expecting and new parent. I can't wait for you all to hear all about PSI. Hi, I'm Allison Egidi, a pediatric sleep and wellness coach and a mom of two. I love to help parents find solutions. This is How Long Till Bedtime. Well, hi, Wendy. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to connecting with you for this conversation because, as you know, it is believed that at least 1 in 5 women struggle with postpartum depression and/or anxiety, and it is the number one complication of pregnancy and childbirth. And whenever the topic of PPA or PPD comes up on this podcast, your organization seems to be the one that everyone mentions as a resource. So I'm really excited to learn more about what you all do. But before we dive in, the first question I always like to ask my guests is what inspired you to pursue your vocation?
Oh, well, first I have to say thank you for having me here. And thank you for even entertaining this whole subject and bringing awareness to it. I promise I will answer your question, but I just I'm so grateful for people your other guests who have come on and talked about Postpartum Support International, PSI, because it really is every single conversation that resources come up are going to be helpful for all of our families. So back to me, Wendy Davis. How did I get interested in this vocation? Well, first, my early career is as a waitress. After that, I became a psychologist, a psychotherapist. And in fact, when you talk about vocation, I suppose that's my vocation, or was. And that was doing one-to-one psychotherapy. I specialized in depression, anxiety, and creative process. How did I get interested in that? Is I've just always been a listener. I experience a lot of empathy, and I'm myself just really interested in people and relationships and how everything works together. In college, I wanted to study more psychobiology, how the mind and body go together. So the reality is I'm happily going along in my career as a psychotherapist when I had postpartum depression and anxiety. So I'd already been a therapist for a long time. And despite being a specialist, as I said, despite my interest, my observation, and all my schooling, when I had depression, anxiety, postpartum, I didn't even realize I was depressed.
Yep.
Not that I was embarrassed to be a therapist with PPD. It's that I didn't realize that all the things I was feeling were depression. I was a specialist. So all of that really woke me up. First, it took me down, and then it woke me up. And in coming out of that, I realized 2 things. One is that I needed to help other people, and that community was part of my cure, that I was a person that was used to just being by myself. So all of that inspires me, and it still inspires me now.
So I'm so curious. You're not the first person I've heard this from that was a therapist when they struggled and then didn't identify that they were struggling for themselves. How did you come to that realization?
The real impact of depression, anxiety, or all mental health disorders is that literally they're mind altering. I mean, so the very symptoms of, just talk about depression or anxiety. So you're depression, sad, hopeless, and I was. Couldn't stop crying. My feelings were flattened. Anytime you're depressed, that's the definition, is that you're not feeling joy or interest in the things that usually bring you joy. And it lasts longer than 2 weeks. That's literally the definition of clinical depression. And the helplessness, hopelessness, lack of perspective, blaming yourself, feeling exhausted, feeling sad for no reason is depression. So all those symptoms, anytime you have them, make you think that it's your fault. This is what you're going through. Now, other times of life when you're depressed, you might recognize, oh, it's a beautiful sunny day and I don't care. I have nothing. I got no juice. I still feel horrible. Well, you put that together with being pregnant or having a baby or that first year, and you've been told your whole life this is going to be the best time of your life, this is the greatest love of your life, those very symptoms that have already made you feel about yourself differently, made you think differently about the world, make you think what I thought wrongly. I shouldn't be a
Right.
mom. This is horrible. I'm really failing at this. Everyone told me I'd be so happy. All the other moms say that it's the best time in their lives. And I don't have, go back to depression. I don't have anything to give. I feel flat. I don't care. And if it were about the sunny day, I would know that something was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have a baby and you have all this weight on you, you blame yourself. And that's the real dilemma. How did I find out that it was depression and not just that I was failing? Honestly, because one of my very best friends just made me call someone. I didn't want to. I was fine.
Yeah.
I didn't want help and I didn't want anyone to see how badly I was feeling, but she just wouldn't let up. She said, maybe just a postpartum doula to help you. You know, you're having a hard time and you deserve to have help. And I finally called to just, kind of like a telethon, like to get her to stop saying
Yeah.
it. So I finally called a postpartum doula, and it was that doula who came over. And you know what she asked me? It was very, very straightforward. She said, have you been depressed or anxious? No one had asked me
Yeah.
that. Nobody had asked me. And that was the beginning where the floodgates opened. I started crying. I started talking to her. And then she, little by little, just gave me more information and was very gentle and really led me to understand that, of course, this is depression, postpartum depression. That's what's happening.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad you had those two individuals in your life. I've shared my story multiple times on this podcast, but I had a friend who came over to, visit the baby. And I remember she asked me, well, how are you? Because when I had my kids, no one asked me about me and I was not well. And I was very caught off guard. And I didn't know her very well, actually, because we were new to our neighborhood. And I remember when she left, I just sat down and cried because sometimes it takes someone asking you to realize you're not well.
Allison, most of the time,
Yeah.
it takes someone asking you, because when we're lost in our own thoughts and feelings, and the symptom is blaming yourself, it's the kindness and the drawing somebody out that really is what almost the pilot light's on, right?
Mm-hmm.
You were in there, I was in there, but it's almost like they just turn it on, light it up, because they're showing compassion to you just by asking a simple question, how are you? And then sharing her experience lightly. I know when I was going through it, nobody asked. even if in that second you weren't able to answer her, it kind of illuminated for you, oh, she was so kind. And now here come the feelings. And it's often when people contact us at Postpartum Support International, there's a moment in the conversation where you could just feel the door open, and usually they start to cry,
Mm-hmm.
and you just know now we can begin. Now she's going to take those steps. She's going to get well, because it's almost like you hit that moment of compassion and kindness. Then you can feel a little of it for yourself.
Totally. Absolutely. Well, let's talk about Postpartum Support International. Can you briefly share the history of Postpartum Support International and how you became so entwined with this organization?
Sure. So yes, I can do it briefly, which is good that you said that, because it did start in 1987. So the history is good and solid, right? So Postpartum Support International, postpartum.net, as I said, started in 1987 in Santa Barbara, California. Jane Honickman is a woman of just great energy and great vision, and was a mom herself who didn't have the support she needed. And notice, nobody's talking about this. The word postpartum wasn't even a word really until the 80s. Because of the doulas, they kind of brought it forward. So PSI started out of Jane's home, telephone, spirit, compassion, and mission to really help anyone struggling with emotions and mental health in pregnancy or postpartum. So, as you can hear in the name, it started as an international organization. And really, the point of it was this: that let's bring this subject up. Let's start talking to each other, create support groups for women, for moms, and their families and their providers. So, in the time that it started, PSI has kept up with the technology and the ability to connect with people on all levels. It's also kept up and become more and more inclusive, starting with including men, dads, and all the way till flash forward to 2024, understanding how important it is that PSI is inclusive of all genders, all gender identities, and also done a better and better job of representing and collaborating and becoming more and more an institution, organization that is beautifully informed by people of color, by people with all kinds of different opinions and attitudes and experiences, but always back to the first mission. During pregnancy, or the whole first year postpartum, is what we call perinatal, and that anyone going through that time deserves to have support, understanding, peer support, and referrals to providers. So PSI does several things together to create the safety net. One is that we provide peer support to pregnant postpartum people. Two is we train providers, and we also get involved in policy and advocacy. But really, PSI is a bridge to take that peer support that I've been there, I see you, I get you, you're on your way to recovery. Here's some information, here's some services for you. And then also, here's referrals. We have lots and lots of referrals to all kinds of help, including mental health counselors, therapists, psychiatrists, naturopaths, and all of it. So that's what we do. And I think that it's just been amazing. As you can hear, you said how I get so entwined. And you can hear even when I answer you, I'm so entwined, right? As a survivor, as a therapist, as a peer supporter, now as a CEO, president. I've been, I have long ago stopped trying to figure out which is the tree and which is the ivy.
Yeah.
So it's just me and working with amazing people. We have over 1,000 volunteers, Allison.
That's what I was going to ask about next. It's this beautiful combination of employees and volunteers, and I wanted to hear a little bit more about that.
One of the things that really makes the work at PSI successful and makes it sing is that PSI is a combination of volunteers and staff. When I was hired as executive director, I had already been a volunteer for about 10 years. And it was such an amazing experience to learn about supporting other people going through pregnancy and postpartum mental health issues. And that just to volunteer my time, even though I was still a therapist, but I did a lot of peer support and then started training peer supporters. When I was hired, I was only the second employee in 2009. And everything else was volunteer. So we were already, from 1987 right into the 2010s, we were completely, really almost entirely volunteer driven organization. And now we have over 1,000 volunteers providing peer support free of charge to anyone who contacts us. The staff also has grown, especially during the pandemic, actually, from 2 staff, right, in 2016 to right now, we have about 75 employees
Whoa.
that work for PSI and another 58, 60 that work for the National Maternal Mental Health Hotline. And still, at the core of what PSI provides is peer support at no charge from people who have come through it, either themselves or they had a loved one that went through something. And then they're trained and supported and structured into the best technology that we can find to really reach people who need the support and get a couple things from that. One is that they get that, live their compassionate response and listening, but they also then are in a community of recovery. And we always say, you don't need a diagnosis to reach out for help. We're here for any question related to pregnancy, post-loss, and postpartum emotional challenges.
I love that. And I think that's something that I want everyone listening to understand is who PSI helps. And so I'll take that question a step further. You mentioned international. So I'm curious if you know your ratios of, how much of their support goes to people in the United States versus other countries, because this podcast has international listeners as well. And then as far as who's eligible, you've mentioned during pregnancy or first year of life, it sounds like the resources are free. Could you just tell a little bit about that? Is everything free? Is anyone eligible? Do you have to qualify? Let's hear a little bit more about that, because I want people to know if PSI is a place where they could go or their friend could go or their partner could go.
The most important thing that I want to say about who is eligible is that anyone who's wondering if it would be helpful is eligible. You don't need a diagnosis to reach out to PSI or other resources if you have them, but we are right here, postpartum.net. And I always want people to know that if you're feeling confused, you're exhausted, you just don't feel like yourself, your feelings don't feel right. And most people in that situation are afraid. Well, they're afraid because they're embarrassed. They're afraid because they don't know if it's safe to reach out. They're kind of afraid, will I feel worse? Are they going to diagnose me? And they're also afraid that they don't belong. And so because of the depression, they're blaming themselves, right? So you don't need a diagnosis. It's free, it's confidential, it's trustworthy. And even if somebody calls one time or texts us or gets on the app one time, you'll start to recognize, oh, that is how I've been feeling. And I think it's important for people to know that when they contact PSI, they're talking to a peer supporter. They're either going to be able to talk and just talk through their feelings, get some good information, get some encouragement and support, and also referrals to other resources if they want them, if they need them. So PSI itself offers an amazing, amazing array of resources. First of all, we have our helpline, That's 800-944-4PPD. And I know, thank you for sharing that in your information. You can find all of this on postpartum.net. But the helpline is voice or text, English or Spanish. And that helpline is primarily in North America, United States and Canada is the helpline. Everything else we have is open internationally. So we have online support groups, over 100 groups. And the groups range, again, it's a secure platform, uses Zoom. You can turn on your video or not turn on your video, and they're facilitated, right? Which is really important. There's a lot of information out there, but it's not always helpful or accurate.
Right.
So all of our support group facilitators are trained and have gone through lived experience themselves or are a professional with expertise. But the core is still peer support. It's not diagnosis. No one's going to prescribe what you should do to get better, just coming together to get help, support, and suggestions. So online support groups, we have peer mentors. We have all kinds of ways then for people to connect locally in their communities. So our next step of support is that we actually have local support volunteers. And you asked the ratio of the United States to other countries. Most of the volunteers are in the United States. As I said before, the online groups are open anytime. Anybody can come to the online groups and can also get peer mentorship, a longer relationship with a one-to-one volunteer. But we have these local support coordinators. And in every state of the United States and Canada and about 50 other countries, Allison, people who are just in those countries there to receive emails or texts, or sometimes it's on, Facebook or Instagram Messenger. People find all kinds of ways, WhatsApp, to get in touch. But the first step is still connecting online, postpartum.net, get help, and then you either go to United States or to international. And the other thing we have is a directory of provider with thousands of providers that you can look at to get referred to. The importance of having a local support coordinator, right, is that that person's going to be able to know even more about the resources all available to you where you live. There's other resources as well. We have phone calls. Someone is like so tired of, going online. There's an actual phone call called Chat with an Expert every single Wednesday for moms and the first Monday of every month for dads. We have a PPD forum online that's called Smart Patients. If people want to go online, but they don't want to go on Facebook or social media, they can go to Smart Patients. And we have a closed Facebook group, which is moderated and safe and secure. And so all of those, if you go to postpartum.net/get-help, you find all of those. And I know just answering that question takes a while because look at all those resources. So when we hear, Allison, when I hear somebody say there aren't any resources, there's nothing to help, it just breaks my heart because we are right here. And all of those resources are available in English and Spanish.
It's amazing. And I think it's so impressive that you've been able to come at this from so many angles. So there's the online piece, which I think is important. And I do want to hear about some of your newest use of technology because sometimes people are struggling, and this was me, to actually leave the home. So I had extreme anxiety about leaving the home and even getting into town. There was a postpartum yoga, baby and mom yoga that I kind of wanted to go to, but my daughter was terrible in the car and it gave me panic attacks to drive the 25 minutes into town. So it really held me back from going to things in person. So I like the fact that you could get online support, you could get a phone call, but I also think it's pretty critical that you help connect people to other humans, because I think what we're all learning in this new digital world is that we do also need human contact. And so I love that you have kind of boots on the ground and people connecting women or men struggling to resources within their community. And it is a common theme that I hear all the time from clients and and from friends that, oh, I can't get into a therapist. I can't get in to see someone, or my doctor didn't have any good resources. The wait list is over a year. I see it in the Facebook groups all the time. The wait list is so long, I can't get in. And so I just want to reiterate to everyone what you're saying is there is help for everyone.
There is help for everyone. And everyone who needs it questions whether they deserve it.
Yes.
Okay. And first of all, I want to say, I'm really sorry you went through that. I understand. And when you've gone through a difficult time, pregnancy or postpartum, just in your own description, we don't need a diagnosis to know that you were struggling and could have used a helping hand. We don't need to know what diagnosis a person has. We just know they're pregnant, post-loss or postpartum. You don't have to do this alone.
Right.
And so I want to say first that one of the risk factors for having postpartum depression, anxiety, and all of the perinatal mental health disorders actually is being a overachiever, being perfectionist, being the one that's always helping others, thinking that, or just not thinking about that. What do you need?
Yeah.
And so that experience that you had, and I really relate to that, of feeling so anxious that it keeps you at home, more isolated. You're afraid to go in the car. You're afraid to go to that yoga class because what if the baby cries? And you're afraid that you're just not doing this right. And that's the spiral that keeps people more isolated and not even recognizing, oh, this is what someone would call anxiety, and there's probably help for this, and it's temporary. This isn't me struggling, failing.
Right.
And it's very important. I say this a lot to people. It's very, very direct, important information. You weren't sad or anxious because you had a baby. You had a baby and you were sad and anxious. And so often we mistake the cause and the effect. So usually people going through a mental health complication or crisis in pregnancy or postpartum think that they're having these feelings because of the baby or because they had the baby. And it's not till you start to feel better that you realize, oh no, I was always bonding, was always with them. I was going through depression or anxiety while that was happening.
Right.
And so that confusion can really lead to such really sad and damaging self-esteem, because you think, oh, now I had the baby and I'm feeling all this. But it's just that it's like saying that blue spruce tree caused my allergy, when it's actually my biology that caused the allergy and I love that tree.
Right.
So I think it's very important what you said, that having some connection to bring you outside is important. But there's a lot of times when you're struggling that outside doesn't feel right and it feels too overwhelming, too scary. So PSI has always been a virtual organization, and we still are. We've always known how to connect with people who couldn't leave their houses or their apartments because either self-care, baby care, and the symptoms of a mental health disturbance, right? Mental health disorder, mental health complication, we call it all kinds of things. So what happened for us is during the pandemic, that's when we had our biggest growth.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Because we already knew how to reach people who were afraid to leave their house and already had the technology and the desire to connect with people around the world. So imagine in the pandemic, our support groups increased fourfold in a month. And now since then have gone up even further. We started in 2018, we had 8 employees. And now we have 72. So all of that ability to connect online is really perfect for this kind of recovery, because you need only to take one step.
Right.
And you don't even have to get in the car.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. And you've been at this a long time, and I have so many questions that would take us off topic about the growth of this organization. That's a massive growth. As a business person, I have a lot of questions, but we won't go there. But what I do want to touch on is, having been in this field for 30 years. Where would you say we've made progress? Let's just take the United States, for example. Where have we made progress as it relates to maternal mental health? And where are we still really lacking? Or maybe you don't think we are. I would just love to hear. I have seen some changes in the last decade, but I'd love to hear what you've seen over the last 30 plus years.
Where have we made changes and where have we not? In some places, in some cases, it's the very same place. So I think we've made some changes in talking about it more, right? So you hear postpartum depression more. You hear about this in the news. You hear about it on TV and movies. It's more of a conversation. However, side by side with that, there's still a stigma, there's misinformation, there's misunderstanding, there's sensationalism. So what we would like to see is real portrayals from, we have so many people with lived experience who would be able to inform any of those areas, right? And to say, this is what it's really like. It's not sensational. It's a real experience people are going through. So we're doing better at talking about it, but there's still a lot of misinformation. Secondly, as I said, we hear about postpartum depression. But as you know, and you talked about, the majority of people struggling with a perinatal mental health crisis are having anxiety. And so we hear postpartum depression, but it's really an umbrella term that covers perinatal. So first of all, pregnancy and up to the first year postpartum and post perinatal loss. So we need to do a better job of understanding the journey and the difficulty and the recovery of people who've lost pregnancies and lost babies. Also, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, which really in the perinatal period comes as repetitive, intrusive thoughts that are really upsetting. You can't seem to shake them. You know they're not true, but they're very, very scary. And it's a kind of anxiety. Post-traumatic stress disorder, bipolar disorders, and psychosis. So we're not doing a great job of showing that it's really a variety of symptoms. And there's still, and I think this will always be the case, there's still shame and embarrassment. So no matter how much better we do as a country or as a world, the World Health Organization trying to talk more about maternal mental health, we're still struggling with this. The biggest obstacle to care is the person's shame and embarrassment and fear to even reach out at all. So that's why an organization like Postpartum Support International will always have a place. It's not because the world will never really have enough policies or have enough funding, although it still looks like we don't have enough. And it's not because there aren't more and more trained providers, because we have more trained providers. It's because the individual going through it is still, the symptom is the shame and embarrassment. So that's always going to be there, and why we always have to raise awareness, talk about it, make a regular part of the conversation, and show pictures of recovery,
right?
Not just sensationalized pictures of bad things that can happen, which do happen. We want to know, but we want to show, we all need to see what recovery looks like, what health looks like, what it looks like. And the storytelling is part of what's really helped bring this out of the shadows and made this more aware. So specifically, many countries, including the United States, have started to prioritize raising awareness and creating resources and doing a better job of reaching into communities and being more inclusive in terms of dealing with people of color and other marginalized people and people who have been left out, really. So a lot of countries are doing better, but there's always a sense that if another priority comes up, like this happened at the beginning of the pandemic, another priority comes up. Yes, we're interested in that, but it's just going to have to be put aside right now.
Yeah.
When really, what is more core than these early years, pregnancy, and the early time of raising a baby for any parent, any family, and any community who needs that strength from inside. So PSI just kept going, although in the pandemic, people said, well, we're going to have to put that project aside. Well, we can't put that project aside. We were needed more than ever, and thank goodness rose to the occasion with a lot of help and a lot of support and some funding from other sources.
Well, I think you absolutely were needed more than ever, because I sensed it with my clients during the pandemic where they were so isolated. So it really just added to people, their friends and family weren't even with them to help them realize, hey, something might not be right here. And so I think you were needed more than ever when everyone was so isolated.
Not only was the stress harder, right, because of the pandemic, it was impossible to get any help.
Right.
And to all of a sudden, even if you had tried to have a healthy pregnancy or postpartum plan, we were all told, well, not now. You can't see other people having to go to their OB appointments or their midwifery appointments by themselves, sometimes birthing by themselves. And that isolation absolutely increased the stress. So any perinatal mental health complication is exacerbated by stress in the environment and also by just what's going on biologically. And then the regular care and exhaustion, as you specialize in, of possibly sleep deprivation, and all of that happening at once really increased the stress and increased the intensity of what we were all going through. And that's why it just made the point that you and I are talking about, which is there has to be a way, and thank goodness, I'm so grateful for PSI, honestly. There has to be a way for people to connect, not only with other people who have gone through it and know how to help, but with themselves and their own ability to take the steps needed to feel better, do what they need to do to take the pressure off themselves and find that time to also remember that there's got to be a time for self-care. And that was never more difficult than we were in the pandemic in our houses and not being able to connect. And we know that people are still not only still recovering from that, but for many, many families, you not only do you have the pandemic baby, but now you have the second baby for many, many families. And we're still dealing with the repercussions of that first isolated experience. So we talk a lot about that with people who contact us and in our support groups from all over the world.
Yeah. And I do think what you said about storytelling is also really important, because we every May feature people on the podcast to share their stories or their experiences, and we're always trying to come at it from different angles. And anytime these episodes come out, I always think, well, I don't know how many people will be interested. They seem very specific. And inevitably, I get messages that'll say, I sobbed listening to that episode. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Please let that person know that their story inspired me to get help. And I only need to get a couple each episode. I need to get one, and I will say that was worth it. That was worth it. If we helped one person realize they are not alone, they aren't the only one experiencing this, then it's worth it. And so I openly share my story, and I was one of those people that it wasn't until I was out of it, about 2 years later, that I could look back and realize, wow, I was not well, but I had to get totally to the other side. And so I openly share my story because I hope someone might say, oh gosh, she had that, and she's okay. She did make it out. And I hear that from people. Like, it made me feel better to know you struggled, and people always apologize. I'm sorry to say this, but it made me feel better to know that you struggled. And I think it's important that people share it. In fact, where I love to see people share it the most actually is on LinkedIn, because I think that is really bucking the system a little bit. You are saying, I don't even care if my employer sees this, if other professionals I work with. And so I have such tremendous admiration for women who will post their stories on LinkedIn. And I think they're reaching a whole new audience that doesn't even know they're looking for it.
That's absolutely right. Because where did we, well, we know the answer to this, but I'll ask it rhetorically. Where did we get the idea that we should never expose any vulnerability, never expose any faults, never show that we're human? So we're missing more and more and more. We're missing the fact that real humans have experiences that don't make them worse than, less than, unproductive. And even if you want to look at it from well, whether you look at it as a family, as a parent, as an employer, as a policymaker, what really is going to help us be strong, really strong and vibrant and productive is if we acknowledge the difficulties we're going through and act with empathy for each other and say, you know, I got you. I know. And good for you for really sharing that. The problem is that it isn't always safe and that there are bullies and there are trolls and there are people who come after you. That's why we need the safe and trustworthy spaces. We need podcasts like yours. We need organizations like ours and the safe support groups, Facebook and WhatsApp and wherever those groups are. The one for PSI is moderated beautifully by one of our staff and about 8 other volunteers. Every post is moderated. Every new member is moderated. We need these spaces. And to be able, I agree with you, to be able to see that on, let's say, LinkedIn, which is thought of as a very professional space, is so encouraging. Those are the posts you want to read. You want to read, I went through this too. And I'm going to share my story with the world to say, you know what, this should be a normal part of conversation. We're all struggling. There was something about the pandemic, which is in more and more spaces, you could finally hear people say, I'm having a hard time. This is hard. And I remember thinking, going through it, if only we could keep that sense of openness about the difficulty of life, we will do much better. But of course, we haven't kept that entirely. You know, you feel like you have to measure up way too much. And I really appreciate you sharing that. And I think that the storytelling is very important. I also think it's important for people to know, well, this is a trustworthy space for me to share it. And if you get put down or teased or bullied about it, back up. Come find us. Come find Allison. Talk to somebody else, because you do not need to feel worse about going through something that only has shown, honestly, how strong you are.
Right.
Because you're still here and we need you here.
That's right. And you've touched on it a little bit, but I want to circle back on when someone else notices you're struggling, or you notice that your partner is struggling or your friend is struggling. I've shared a few times, my dad was the final push for me when he said he could tell I wasn't myself. I think I could ask him today, did you know I struggled from postpartum anxiety? And he would probably say, what? You did? But he was the person who said, you don't seem like yourself and we are worried about you. And that was a real turning point for me. But I love to hear the advice you give. Is it just ask how they are? Because it's uncomfortable to sometimes broach this subject. You certainly don't want to be wrong when you're saying something doesn't seem right. You don't want to make things worse. So what is your best advice if you know your girlfriend doesn't seem quite like herself, or your partner or spouse doesn't? What do you say to those folks?
There are a couple key elements to that are helpful to people. What I'm going to tell you first, what not to do. Okay.
Yes.
So
great.
You might, if you're someone going through this and you see your friend, your sister, or whomever, your partner is going through this, you might feel some zeal. I gotta get her help. I gotta get her. That's not where to start. right? So what you don't want to do is say, this could get really bad.
Mm.
You know, that's not it. When someone is going through this, the best things you can do are, first of all, as your friend did, as your dad did, as your neighbor did, and as your dad did, to say, how are you doing? And leave space for the person to answer. You feel how important that is. Leave space. Because if you remember, when you're going through mental health or emotional challenges, it actually takes time to find your words. So here are a couple key ways to ask. Just say, how is it going? How are you doing emotionally? Nobody ever asks that. Ask about the baby. How's the baby sleeping? How's the baby eating? What about how are you sleeping? How are you doing emotionally? Leave space for them to answer. Here's a key question that I have learned to ask. Is this what you expected?
Mm.
That's a real opener. Also, then to gently say, I know you are working so hard. You are working so hard. You are doing such a good job. You've been working so hard to be healthy in pregnancy, because this is also during pregnancy as well as postpartum. Or somebody working hard with this parenting thing, they never feel like they're doing a good job ever. So you have to be able to give them some positive, and can say something like this: you're working so hard. I see how hard you're working. You know what? I feel like you are struggling, and I wonder if you're feeling okay emotionally. What your dad said to you was very simple. He wasn't diagnosing you. He just said, you don't seem like yourself. That's a fine expression, and obviously you have a good connection with him. But think about all the different tones someone could use. You don't seem like yourself, like backing up. I can hear in your description is your dad was leaning in.
Mm-hmm.
It was really some love in there. And so if you have that relationship with someone, that's a perfectly loving thing to say. And then to say, you know what? There's resources, and you don't need a diagnosis to reach out for help. There's this support line you can call or text, Postpartum Support International. Just talk to them about it. But more than all of that, the best thing we can do is find a way to take the burden off. It's hard when someone's depressed or anxious. Sometimes they're afraid to let people help, and they think that it's a sign they're failing. But just a very simply call and say, hey, I'm at the store. What can I bring you?
Yes.
Or do you want, hey, is it okay if I hold the baby? Or would you like a break? I have an hour today. I can come over. You can take a shower, take a walk. Getting some of that real practical support, and then leaving that space open and talking to them also about how normal, I mean, this is really common. At least 1 in 5 women, at least 1 in 10 dads have some kind of mental health crisis. That's a lot.
Yes.
And so it should be a normal, the fact that we don't talk about it is part of what keeps people from getting help.
Yep. And I always try to, it's funny you say that I'm at the store. I texted my friend this morning. She brought her baby home from the NICU yesterday. And I was driving my girls to school and thinking, how can I help her in this moment where I know she's completely overwhelmed? And I thought, I'm just going to text her and tell her I'm going to Starbucks. So I sent her a text and said, I'm doing school drop off. I'm heading to Starbucks on my way home. Could I drop off a coffee on your front steps? Because I always relate to, I didn't want people to make me feel like I had to get dressed and do all the things.
Yes.
And she responded right away, I would love to say yes in all caps, but I'm actually taking the baby to an appointment or need to go somewhere. But I thought, okay, great. I'll bring one tomorrow. I'll bring her a coffee tomorrow.
Yeah.
But I always encourage people with their friends, even if we don't know if they're struggling or doing great, to help them feel less isolated, to try to say, I'm going to do something. And it could be, can I hold the baby? I am taking this mom a meal on Monday. I'm going to bring you a meal. I'll drop off a coffee. But I also always say, let's not force them to get up and entertain us if they don't want to. Just leave it on the front step. You can still be supportive without them having to entertain you.
That's right. That's one of my favorite things to do for new parents is, I'm going to get you Thai food. I'm leaving it or now I'm going to call Grubhub,
Yeah.
what's your favorite food? And just don't worry about me. You do not need to entertain me. You do not need to get out of your half jammies. I just want you to know every parent deserves and needs support. Just traditionally,
Yes.
when you're pregnant postpartum, that's ancient. We live in our own houses. We're so isolated, so we've lost that support. So I want people to really hear this. And it's just true for everything you talk about in your podcast and all that you do in your work. And it's really true here that part of what we're suffering from is not having that like just absolutely natural support systems. And so you're not just struggling because you're not struggling because you're doing this wrong. You're struggling because it's hard.
Right.
And if you have any kind of mental health challenges, it's harder. What we want people to know before we finish is this, that what you're going through is actually common. You haven't heard about it because people are afraid to talk about it. Let's talk about it. And most importantly, temporary, treatable, supportable. This is not how you're going to feel the whole time you're a parent. This is
Right.
how you're feeling now. And now is when you need a little extra. You need a little extra support and extra care because you deserve that.
Absolutely. And before we wrap up, I do want to touch on the dads because I think this is an area that really has not gotten a ton of attention. And last May, we had 3 dads who came on and shared their story about having wives who struggled, but also sometimes dads are struggling from postpartum depression. Can you share a little bit about that and how you are able to support them, or resources that they should know about, or you as a partner should know if you think your husband or partner is struggling and he could use some help?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for asking about the dads. PSI, as I said before, PSI supports people no matter how they identify, right? But the majority of people are moms and dads. And up to 1 in 10 dads has an actual depression in the postpartum period. So we have groups for dads. We have specialized groups and specialized volunteers and a chat with an expert every Monday night. And I think what's really important for dads is that they deserve and need support too, and nobody's asking, right? So the more we can do to just bring everybody into the conversation, the better. Again, one of the stereotypes about men is that they don't want to talk. You know what? Again, as I said before, in general, about asking people how they are, I think that men need space to answer. And I think that sometimes, especially women, kind of come at these questions and come at dads and say, well, he just wants to fix things, or he just doesn't want to talk about feelings. And I don't think that's fair. I think women want to fix things all the time. I
Yeah.
think we should be honest about that, and that men need some space and need people to say, hey, how are you doing? And how, I think many, many men are internally feeling like they're supposed to, yes, they're supposed to make it better and fix it. And that they feel like they're failing also if their partner is depressed or anxious. And if I can just tell you, it's not, I want to say to the partners, it's not your fault. You can help a lot. You didn't cause this, you can't cure it. And I know that my husband and I really had to talk about that a lot and understand that anything that I needed, he probably needed too, right?
Right.
And so dads are really, really important here.
Well, I'm so glad that you all are able to provide a resource for the dads as well. And this has been so helpful. I've learned a lot today about all the amazing things that PSI has to offer. So thank you. And you've touched on so many great things, but is there any last tidbit that you wish every expecting or new mom or dad knew as it relates to mental health, maybe specifically maternal mental health?
I'll say 2 things. One is that I wish every expecting and new parent knew that the emotions and need for extra support is actually universal and normal, and we all deserve that. some of us will have extra emotional and mental health challenges. It's not your fault. The motto of PSI, you're not alone, you're not to blame, and with the right help, you will get well. You will feel like yourself
Yes.
again. So I want people to know, take the time to take care of yourself. Know that you're going to talk yourself out of it 5 times over. And know that just like you would tell your best friend or your own child, if you deserve love, you deserve connection, you deserve help, and it's temporary and treatable. So this time of your life, it's your season to receive support. The second thing I want to say is, for people who have gone through this, and as you're talking about, kind of want to know how to stay involved or get involved, we have 2 other ways with PSI. One is the Climb, which is an international friend-raising and fundraising event, and it's a wonderful way to give back. And the other is the Blue Dot Project. So you can find both of
Oh,
those on
great.
our website. And just working together, I mean, this is really how we want to help people have not only a good start nutritionally, not only a good start in terms of like stimulation and singing the right songs to people, but what about your emotional life? What about taking care of that pregnancy, that postpartum emotional life, and give it a little care, just like a growing plant, and you will recover faster, you'll feel better, and you'll be able to help other people when they need it.
Absolutely. Well, you have mentioned so many resources and numbers, and we will link to everything in the show notes. But if there's one way that you want people to connect with you, what would that be? Would that be the website, Instagram? What would be the best way for anyone to connect with PSI?
Really, the best way is to go right to postpartum.net. There's a wealth of resources. If you want to find the support resources, go to postpartum.net/get-help. And wait, we have a new app. We just launched it last month. Connect by PSI, available at your app store, and you'll find everything you need.
Oh, I love it. Great. We will absolutely put that in the show notes as well.
Allison, thank you so much for having me here and letting me talk about PSI.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join me. And thank you so much for the amazing work that you, the volunteers, all of the staff do at PSI to support moms and dads. It means the world. You are truly changing people's lives.
Oh, thank you so much. And also to share our podcast that comes from our Climb team, I Am One podcast. We love podcasts as another way that people are really nurtured and informed and connected. And thank you for the work that you're doing every day, Allison.
Perfect. It's such a joy. All right. Bye for now.
Bye for now. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to How Long Till Bedtime. To learn how we can work together to improve your child's sleep, please visit sleepandwellnesscoach.com.